Hello, I'm Emerald Ye. Did you know that Asian women have the highest suicide rate of any elderly group in this country? This is a shocking fact to everyone who hears it, and the root cause is depression. This illness, and it is an illness, affects more people than you might expect. Many are too proud to seek help, feeling shame and suffering in silence. We often don't recognize the symptoms of depression or know where to turn for help.
My grandmother obviously had it because she eventually killed herself as a young woman, as did many of the other relatives in our family, all of them women. As a child, of course, I didn't know that it was depression. I thought this was simply the way my mother was. She went into rages at times. I thought my mother just had a bad temper. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I began to see that my mother had some problems. So when I realized she was ill, I could see my mother as a different kind of person, that I could feel compassion for that. Somebody who's gone through war and the loss of children and spouse certainly could have a problem with depression. If they've been uprooted from their families, if they've seen terrible traumas in war, yes, they certainly could have depression. But what I've found, as in my family, these were the secrets they didn't talk about with us kids. And so in discovering their stories and what they had gone through, I was more aware, certainly, of how depression certainly could be part of their profile.
Amy Tan's story about depression in her family is remarkable. Sadly, other families have similar stories. To help you learn more and maybe assist a loved one, we want you to meet 3 people from our community, as well as members of their families and the professionals who help them get better. You will learn what depression looks like, as well as the issues that are unique to Asian Americans, and discover what people like you have learned about healing the spirit through treatment of depression. The first person is Feng Chen Chan. Mrs. Chan came to the U.S. from Hong Kong many years ago. The hardships of her life in Hong Kong and her immigration to a new country and new culture increased her risk of depression.
I was the second wife. The first wife had a baby boy, but she died. So my husband married me, and I had 8 children. We had a difficult time, always hungry. We shared a single flat in Hong Kong.
Her husband died, and then she immigrated over here to the United States. So that already raises a red flag: relocation out of your culture, possible social isolation. She got into 2 subsequent car accidents, which affected her physically. And I would think that that would also affect her functionality and her independence, which can also lead to some degree of depression later on.
It was a month in the hospital when I thought it would be 3 to 4 days after the car hit me. I stayed in the hospital for a month and had a cast on for 2 months. All day I would think about suicide. It was too much trouble and too hard to concentrate.
She doesn't show her unhappiness right away. She slowly builds up her anger. After a while, though, she shows her unhappy feelings. Normally, my mother is very talkative, but when she's not in a good mood, she's silent. Doesn't say a word. She just sits and stares.
Some of the early signs of depression are very individualized. It depends on what the baseline behavior of that person is. So if somebody's normally active and all of a sudden they're lethargic, or they're not eating, they're sleep deprived, or else they sleep too much. But then the more emotional signs we look for are tearfulness, or obviously suicidal ideation, just sort of retreating or isolation, or it actually could be agitation.
They gave me some medicine to take because I was crying all the time. When I visited the doctor the next time, he said, "Mrs. Chan, you look very, very good and happy." I said, "You gave me medicine, so I'm happy and don't cry anymore." I called the red pills happy medicine, and now I'm still taking the happy medicine.
So we've learned that depression is an illness and that seeking help and getting the right medication can really improve a patient's condition. For Asians, though, there are cultural and historical factors that may increase the risk for depression and make it more difficult to seek help.
I believe it's important to not just understand the cultural background of a person you're treating for depression, for example, but when you know their life history and their immigration pattern. What happened to them when they were coming over? What happened to them before they came over? Was their family all shot to death in Vietnam before they came over? Or were they themselves political prisoners before they came over? You have to realize individually what those traumas were and then what caused them to be here.
We're blowing up. This is all the camp stuff here with the family.
Internment during World War II separates the Japanese Americans from other Asians as well as the mainstream. Over 100,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast were sent to relocation centers because they were not trusted. They were thought that they were spies. It has an impact on Japanese Americans today. And three words come to my mind is haji, which means shame, and there was a sense of shame during the internment. Enryo, which means to hold back, never indulge fully into anything, is always hold back. And gaman, which means to endure. So therefore, as a result, pride is a value of Japanese Americans, and they do not want to be seen as someone who needs help. And so denial becomes a factor here, because when anybody asks them how they're doing, they will always say they're doing fine when they're really suffering.
I believe that my sister realized that she needed some help with her mental issues, and in particular probably depression. She kind of lost her identity by not working anymore after 30 years of being a occupational therapist.
Being sad, crying some too, but not being able to handle all the things that I have to handle.
Denial is a big thing for my sister. Hopefully she's going to work her way through this thing. Initially she had issues with talking about depression and whether she's depressed at all, and I would mention to her that, hey, you're taking antidepressants, so you must be, somebody thinks that you need help along that line, and I think you did to begin with, and maybe you still do, and maybe you're in denial. And she would say, I'm not in denial, I'm not depressed.
I went to Stanford geriatric clinic, and so they were the ones that recommended that I live at a facility because they didn't feel that it was good for me to live by myself.
I believe she's benefited from the board and care just from the standpoint that they've monitored her foods, the fact that she's lost a considerable amount of weight, and that has reduced her need to be an insulin-dependent diabetic.
Besides just being at the house to, get out and do things and meet people.
That's great.
People should not hesitate to get help if they need help. Don't be shy, I guess, or don't be ashamed.
Our third patient, Lolita Naong, had a long-term illness and needed to move to an institution. Chronic illness, losing familiar habits, and moving away from her family and friends made Lolita more at risk for depression.
This was just an incredibly big adjustment for her. First of all, she had to leave her home. She was moving into an institution, and I noticed that she was teary at times. She was isolating herself.
When I feel sad, I don't know, as if nothing happened, the same thing. And they asked me what I wish they. I said, it's fine, I'm okay. But they go see my face, I can sad. I miss this a lot, because special occasion, we always go over there, in this, feeding the hungry. I used to cook adobo. That's I'm famous for that, this, because the homeless, they like the adobo, chicken adobo.
When they're not able to then carry on with the usual activities that they do, such as organizing family events, participating in church events, they may feel useless because they define themselves according to how they are contributing in that community, and may contribute also to developing depression or aggravating the symptoms of depression.
And now let us all together do the confession. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have sinned through my own faults, and in my faults that I have done, and in what I have failed to do.
Well, since Catholicism is a big part of my mom's daily activities, I know that she turns to prayer, and it gives her time to settle her mind, to be at peace with her spirituality.
In the case of many Filipino families who are now here in the United States, it's not unusual to find that it's a very intergenerational household. When a parent, such as Mrs. Lolita, is now living with the after effects of stroke, and an American-born son is the caregiver, there is the difference in culture, and Patrick may need to really try and enter the world of his mother. And in the Filipino culture, nonverbal behavior is a very important component of the communication process.
I remember sitting down with her and telling her, I understand her illness and so forth, but I couldn't read her mind, and that she would need to communicate with me so I could understand where she was coming from.
I know that Patrick mentioned that, I know I'm your son now, but I'm also your friend. And while Lolita has been in the role of taking care of him and putting her own needs secondly in many occasions, the roles are now, of course, somewhat reversed. To being a caring friend, to express concern, to provide support for her, and to be a companion to her. He's a fellow traveler with her now on this journey as an adult.
Depression is an illness that can be treated. Although the stories you heard today were from women, Asian men are equally at risk for this illness and often struggle more than women because of their stronger reluctance to seek help. Family members can help loved ones who are suffering from depression by finding and using community services for their elders and for themselves.
Dealing with an illness of a parent or a grandparent can be extremely stressful for the children. And so we have to remember also that community services are out there not just for the grandparent or the parent, but for the children caring for that person as well. Resources that can teach you how to deal with, how to talk to your parent, or just resources that can help you take a break. So it's important to remember that this is a family problem. It's not just the person who's ill, but the people who are caring for that person, more importantly, need help and support as well.
In the Bay Area, there are several organizations that serve Asian elderly. They're shown on your screen, or you can visit the Asian Pacific Fund's website at www.asianpacificfund.org. Most important of all, remember that depression is not a natural part of aging. It is an illness that can be treated.
I look back and I have no bitterness about what happened, in part because I found my refuge in writing and trying to understand the history of your own family. My grandmother, this woman who left a legacy of depression, but also strength in our family, that you could change the depression by understanding it, dealing with it, overcoming it through treatment and care, and then making it a strength, and seeing with compassion then what had happened to my mother and her mother before her.
Facing depression can be a long journey, but it's a journey that can have a happy ending if the family is committed to recognizing it, getting help, and healing the spirit through treatment of depression.